Adam Jones, an enslaved boy on a Mississippi plantation, who slaughtered his master's household in one violent night of blood and fire in 1832. His name, whispered later as the Butcher of Mississippi, did not begin as a title of power. It was born in chains, forced upon a child who knew no freedom, who carried no weapon but his rage. That night, Adam crossed a threshold from suffering into vengeance, leaving behind not just corpses, but a memory that would haunt the South like a shadow it could never shake. Before we start, let's connect each other. Comment below where you from, watching this video, and what's time there. This was not a random act, nor a sudden storm of cruelty. It was the eruption of years pressed into silence, years in which a boy endured humiliation, hunger, and the lash. In the still darkness of Mississippi's countryside, the powerless struck back, and the plantation system, so sure of its control, found itself staring into the face of its own fear. Imagine the scene: a boy, scarcely grown, standing over the bodies of those who once owned him. His hands, once ordered to pick cotton and clean floors, now held the instruments of death. His act was not the rebellion of armies, not the uprising of many. It was the solitary fury of a child who had been given nothing but pain. The masters who believed themselves untouchable discovered, in their final moments, that even the smallest hand could cut deep. The story of Adam Jones begins here, in that house of silence and screams. He was both executioner and orphan, both victim and avenger. To the white South, he became a nightmare given flesh. To the enslaved, he became a story too dangerous to speak aloud, yes, too powerful to forget. They would say his name in secret: Adam, the boy who slaughtered. The brutality of the act forces a question that still lingers. Was Adam a murderer, or was he something else entirely? In a land where justice never reached the enslaved, where cruelty was law, where every day was survival, his strike was both terrifying and inevitable. His transformation, from a powerless boy to a figure of blood-soaked defiance, makes him one of the darkest symbols of rebellion in Mississippi's history. This story is not one of redemption. It offers no comfort, no soft ending. It is the story of vengeance carved into flesh and memory, a reminder that chains cannot silence the human will forever. The Butcher of Mississippi was not born, he was made, shaped by cruelty, until he broke. Adam Jones stands at the threshold of this story, a boy who became a blade, a slave who became a shadow in history, his name written not with ink, but with blood. And as his story unfolds, one thing becomes certain: the South feared rebellion in whispers. But here, in Adam's strike, those whispers became screams. He was born into Mississippi's fields of chains, where the soil itself was watered with sweat and screams. The act that would later give him his terrible name can only be understood inside this world of brutality, where slavery was not an accident of fate, but the very foundation of the South's wealth. Mississippi, in the early 1800s, was a land carved by cotton. The crop ruled every hour, every body, every life. To the white masters, the plantations were kingdoms. To the enslaved, they were prisons without walls. From sunrise to sunset, men, women, and children bent their backs under the relentless sun, their labor feeding an empire of profit. Whips cracked through the air like punctuation marks, ensuring silence, enforcing obedience, reminding every soul of their place. The law itself conspired against them. Codes written in ink were chains just as heavy as those forged of iron. Enslaved people could not testify in court, could not own property, could not marry legally, could not defend themselves against their masters. To the state, they were not human beings but living tools, and if one resisted, punishment was swift, public, and merciless. A spectacle meant to terrorize the many into submission. Hunger was constant, clothing thin, and shelter bare. Nights offered little rest, for even in darkness the fear lingered, the sound of boots approaching, the knock on the cabin door, the demand for more. Childhood, like Adam's, was not childhood at all, but training in obedience. Every laugh cut short, every dream smothered beneath the reality that his body was owned, his choices erased. Every field carried whispers of defiance. An overseer's cruelty became a story. A runaway's capture became a warning. Every lash struck on another's back was also struck upon those who watched. In such a world, silence was survival, but inside, fires burned. Even the smallest act of resistance, a slowed step, a hidden glance, was rebellion enough to invite death. The plantation system thrived on fear. And yet that fear was never absolute. The masters believed the whips and the laws would hold forever. But beneath the surface, every injustice pressed tighter, every humiliation planted deeper. In fields of cotton, where nothing grew but toil and despair, retaliation was not a distant idea. It was inevitable, waiting for the moment when silence could no longer hold. The boy who would one day be called the Butcher of Mississippi did not invent his fury. It was shaped by the system that bound him. His act of slaughter was not just against a household. It was against a world that had already condemned him before he could speak his name. And to understand him, one must first understand this world, this Mississippi, where cruelty was ordinary and violence was law. He never entered the world free. From the moment he opened his eyes, the law marked him not as a child, but as property. His name was written in ledgers beside cattle and tools, proof that innocence could be owned, priced, and traded. Childhood for Adam was no season of play. It was labor from the start. Enslaved children were set to tasks as soon as they could walk, carrying water, sweeping yards, tending livestock. Each duty was a rehearsal for the endless toil ahead. What should have been years of laughter and discovery became years of submission. Shaped by orders barked across the fields, separation was common. Families torn apart on the auction block left countless children alone, raised not by parents, but by the system that claimed them. Whether Adam knew his mother's voice or felt his father's hand remains unrecorded. But what is certain is that the plantation owned every part of him. Bonds of love were fragile under the shadow of sale, always threatened by the whip and the ledger. Surveillance was constant. Eyes of overseers followed even the smallest movements, teaching children early that no moment was private. A stolen glance, a whispered word, even the pause of a tired step could bring punishment. Fear became a companion, pressing down on every choice, training obedience through terror. The cruelty of this system carved scars before the body was even grown. Hunger gnawed, clothing frayed, and nights were restless with the sounds of suffering nearby. Adam's boyhood was not sheltered but sharpened by these realities. Each lash witnessed, each humiliation endured, pressed the weight of slavery deeper into his mind. The transformation from child to executioner did not begin in a single moment. It began here, in the denial of his youth. By stripping away play, family, and safety, the plantation sowed rage in silence. Adam was shaped first as a victim, denied the very softness of childhood. What remained was a boy who learned that survival required silence. But silence could not last forever. The figure history would call the Butcher of Mississippi was once only a child, and in that truth lies the most chilling contrast of all. The violence that erupted later was not born in a vacuum, but seated in the cradle, nurtured in bondage, and matured beneath the gaze of masters who believed fear would last forever. Adam Jones, an enslaved boy in Mississippi, who slaughtered his master's household, did not rise against gentle hands. The people he struck down had already marked him with years of torment. Their cruelty was not sudden. It was a daily rhythm, a drumbeat of pain that grew louder with every passing season. The master ruled with the lash. His whip cracked across backs until flesh split, and he carried it not as a tool, but as a symbol of his authority. Adam watched others buckle under it, heard their screams pierce the night, and knew that at any moment he could be next. Fear became the air he breathed. but alongside it grew a quiet fury. Food was withheld as punishment. Meager rations of cornmeal and salt pork were cut further, forcing the enslaved to work through hunger that hollowed their bodies. Adam learned to silence his stomach, to keep moving, even as weakness pressed on his limbs. Hunger became another chain, binding him to a life where even the smallest comfort was denied. Humiliation was constant. Orders barked in front of others stripped dignity away. Children were mocked, adults degraded, elders treated with scorn. The master's household enforced this cruelty with calculated precision. Each insult meant to remind Adam that he was property, not person. This was the night everything changed. Share this with one friend who needs to hear how rage can become resistance. Everyday labor deepened the torment. From dawn until night, fields stretched endlessly under the Mississippi sun. Overseers demanded speed, strength, and silence, punishing even the smallest pause. Sweat mixed with blood in the soil, and exhaustion was met not with rest, but with more demands. The mistress of the house joined in the cruelty. Her punishments came through words sharpened like blades. She scolded, belittled, and ensured Adam understood his place was always beneath her gaze. Her presence turned home into prison, and her approval of violence gave it license to spread unchecked. The cruelty reached into moments of potential relief. Sabbath offered no sanctuary, laughter, no safety. Even the sound of a hymn could be broken by sudden punishment. There was no corner of life free from their reach. For Adam, even silence felt dangerous, as though quiet itself could be interpreted as defiance. Each act of abuse became fuel, sparks falling on a heart already dry with suffering. A whipping here, a starvation there, an insult casually thrown, all were tinder. Together they built a fire inside him, invisible yet growing. This section of his life revealed the truth. Adam's violence did not appear out of nowhere. It was shaped by a system designed to grind him down, one cruelty layered upon another, until endurance became unbearable. By the time he lifted his hand against the household, it was not a question of if, but when. The master's cruelty had written the ending long before the first blow was struck. What remained was for Adam to decide how he would answer torment that had never known an end. His fury, long contained, broke loose with a violence that no one in the household had foreseen. What followed was not chaos, but an eruption carried out with chilling precision. It began in silence. The night pressed down heavy, the household wrapped in the fragile calm of sleep. Adam moved through that stillness with a clarity sharpened by suffering. In his hands, the instrument of death became more than a weapon. It was an answer to the cruelty that had stretched across his young life. The first strike fell swiftly. Flesh gave way to steel, and a cry split the quiet. The sound was jagged, rising in panic, but cut short before it could carry far. In the darkness, fear rippled through the house. Doors opened, voices called out. The rhythm of ordinary night broke, replaced by confusion that turned instantly to terror. Screams followed. They echoed through the halls, twisting against the wooden walls of the home that had long been Adam's prison. Each scream marked a reckoning. Each step he took deepened the rupture between master and slave. What had once been a home of authority and dominance became a theater of blood. The mistress fell beneath his hand. Her voice, sharp with cruelty and life, shrank into a final gasp. Servants loyal to the family stumbled into his path, but fear paralyzed them. The household's order collapsed in minutes, as if the walls themselves recoiled from the violence within. Children cried out, their fear piercing. Adam did not falter. The rage that drove him was not momentary. It had been gathered, layered through years of lashings, hunger, and humiliation. Now it found its outlet in a storm of blows that left no part of the house untouched. The master himself rose to confront him, but it was too late. Years of dominance meant nothing in that instant. His body, once the instrument of authority, crumpled beneath the weight of the boy's vengeance. His voice, the same that had commanded, insulted, and condemned, fell silent forever. Blood stained the wooden floors. The house reeked of iron and death. The air, once filled with commands and scorn, now pulsed with stillness broken only by fading moans. For the first time, Adam stood in a world where the voices of his tormentors were no more. The pacing slowed. The screams that had once filled the house were swallowed by silence. Every shadow seemed heavier, every creak of the boards louder. The boy stood among the bodies, drenched not only in blood, but in the weight of what had been done. This was no frenzy. It was deliberate, each act a response to years of cruelty. Every motion carried the gravity of history, the unbearable knowledge that nothing less than this could have broken the chains he bore. By the time the last life was taken, the house stood as a tomb. Torches burned low, the night outside eerily calm, as if the world itself paused to acknowledge the horror inside those walls. The boy had become more than a victim. He was now the butcher of Mississippi, his name forever branded by the act. The aftermath lingered in the silence. No voice rose to challenge him, no master's hand reached for the whip. Only blood bore witness, seeping into the wooden planks, writing a record of vengeance that could never be erased. The night of carnage had ended, but the weight of it would remain, heavy, undeniable, and eternal, with dawn. His act tore the plantation from its rigid order into chaos. What had been a seat of control only hours before now stood as a house of corpses, its silence deafening in the early light. The overseer was the first to find the wreckage. His shouts shattered the morning stillness, carrying across the fields. Within minutes, word spread, servants whispered in terror, neighbors rode hard toward the plantation, and the air filled with the frenzied gallop of horses. Order collapsed. Fear took its place. Bodies were dragged into view, each one proof that authority had been pierced. The master, the mistress, the children, all gone. Faces pale, voices shaken, white men gathered with disbelief etched into their features. This was not supposed to happen here. Not on their soil, not under their power. The boy's revolt had breached an unspoken line. Panic moved swiftly beyond the plantation. Neighbors armed themselves. Rifles were pulled from racks, pistols loaded, dogs unleashed. Slave patrols were summoned, their boots striking the ground in hurried rhythm. They scoured fields, creeks, and woods, desperate to contain what they saw not as one act of vengeance, but as a spark that could ignite rebellion across the South. The enslaved, meanwhile, carried whispers on the wind. In cabins in hidden corners, voices lowered but eyes lit with something forbidden awe. Adam Jones had done what most never dared even to imagine. He had struck back, and struck with such force that white society trembled, for those still bound in chains. His name passed from mouth to mouth, like a dangerous prayer. Yet the awe was shadowed by dread. Every enslaved man, woman, and child knew what followed such defiance. Punishment would not fall only on the one who had lifted the blade. The lash, the noose, and the fire would descend indiscriminately, sweeping across the innocent as retribution. The weight of his act pressed heavy on all who shared his condition. White panic swelled into frenzy. Patrols fanned out, imagining rebels behind every tree, conspiracies in every whisper. The boy had carved not only lives, but certainty itself from the world they thought unshakable. Every shadow became suspect, every bondman a threat. Their control, once absolute, now felt fragile, brittle as glass. At the plantation, the scene remained grim. The stench of blood clung to the halls. Horses stamped nervously. Overseers barked orders that rang hollow, their voices strained by fear. The ground where Adam had walked was no longer just soil. It was marked, consecrated by an act that left even the most hardened men unsettled. By noon, the boy had vanished into the landscape. The hunt continued, but the damage was already done. The master's authority had been silenced by the very hands it sought to command. The system itself, so rigid and brutal, quaked under the realization that its violence could and would breed vengeance. Shattered dawn had arrived, and with it the recognition that the butcher of Mississippi had forever disturbed the fragile balance of terror and control. Adam Jones, an enslaved boy in Mississippi who slaughtered his master's household in a single night, did not vanish into myth without pursuit. The system he had defied moved quickly to hunt him down. Slave patrols swept through the woods, bloodhounds unleashed, rifles loaded, torches burning against the darkness. For white society, his capture was not just about one boy. It was about reasserting control, restoring terror, proving that rebellion would always end in chains. When Adam was seized, his body bore the marks of struggle, yet it was not his wounds that mattered to his captors. It was his defiance. They paraded him back as proof that no enslaved person could truly escape the grasp of slavery. The same land that had witnessed his act of vengeance now became the stage for his punishment. The trial that followed was theater, but theater with a single, predetermined ending. In Southern courtrooms, enslaved defendants were never equals. They were property on display, their fates dictated before a word was spoken. Adam was brought forward, shackled, surrounded by hostile eyes. His act was read not as rebellion, but as murder of the highest order. A crime not only against a household, but against the very foundation of white supremacy. Judges, juries, lawyers, all instruments of the same machinery. There was no defense counsel to plead for him, no mercy to be found. Testimonies from overseers painted him as a beast, ungrateful and monstrous, erasing the years of torment that had carved his rage. Each word struck like another lash, branding him in the eyes of the court as less than human, undeserving of even the notion of justice. The audience within the courtroom knew what they had come to see. Some watched in horror, others with satisfaction, but all understood that this was more than punishment. This was performance. Every blow of the gavel was designed to send a message across the South. Rebellion would be crushed, swiftly and without hesitation. Adam's silence during the proceedings, whether by choice or suppression, became its own haunting presence. The boy who had torn through the master's household stood before the law as though already sentenced, his very existence declared guilty. In that silence, there lingered an unspoken truth. His actions had forced the system to reveal itself not as just, but as vengeful. The verdict was inevitable. Death, not by leniency, not by delay, but with the urgency of fear. Execution would follow swiftly, carried out not in private, but in public, to remind every enslaved man, woman, and child that resistance meant annihilation, whether by hanging, firing squad, or the stake. The sentence carried the same weight, terror masquerading as justice. For the enslaved who heard the news, the trial's outcome brought a dual reckoning. On one hand, it confirmed what they already knew, that the law existed not to protect them, but to enforce their chains. On the other, it immortalized Adam Jones as more than a victim. He had dared to strike back, and though crushed by the machinery of Southern justice, his act could not be erased. In the end, the boy's body was broken, but his defiance endured. The court may have silenced his voice, yet his story traveled in whispers, passed through quarters, carried in memory. What the system called justice was, in truth, only another layer of terror. But beneath that terror flickered the recognition that one enslaved child had forced an empire of cruelty to tremble. The capture and trial of Adam Jones closed his physical story, but it exposed the brutal reality of law in the South, not blind, not impartial, but sharpened into a weapon, wielded to defend slavery itself. His name lingered, whispered in corners, carried in shadows, etched into memory as both terror and defiance. The legacy of his act spread through the cotton fields and plantation houses, an echo that neither whip nor gallows could erase. Among white masters, the story hardened into nightmare. They spoke of him as the butcher, a child turned executioner, a figure that embodied their deepest fears. His rebellion was not dismissed as madness. It was seen as a threat that could ignite others. In response, surveillance grew tighter, punishments harsher, trust thinner than ever before. Every enslaved boy or girl was now viewed through the lens of suspicion, a potential Adam Jones waiting to rise. The cruelty of the system deepened, born out of fear of its own collapse. For the enslaved, his act became something different. Not a horror, but a symbol. Quietly, dangerously, they spoke of him with a forbidden awe. He was proof that bondage did not erase humanity's most primal instinct, the urge to resist. His strike showed that even the smallest and most powerless could inflict a wound on the oppressor. For those still trapped in chains, it was a flicker of possibility, however brief. That slavery was not unbreakable. The duality of his legacy created ripples that lasted beyond his lifetime. To the enslavers, Adam Jones justified the tightening of chains. To the enslaved, he revealed the cracks in the system itself. His story became a paradox, both weapon and warning, both nightmare and inspiration. Over time, the memory blurred, details lost to silence and suppression. Yet the essence endured. A boy, born without freedom, stripped of childhood, forced into labor and humiliation, had dared to turn violence back upon the very household that claimed to own him. In doing so, he carved his name into the dark ledger of American slavery. The legacy of Adam Jones haunts because it refuses simplification. He was both victim and avenger, child and executioner, crushed by the system, yet briefly triumphant over it. His name embodies the truth that slavery itself created its own destroyers, that beneath endless chains, sparks of resistance waited for their moment to ignite. For the enslaved, his story whispered courage. For the masters, it whispered dread. For history, it remains a testament to the unbearable weight of oppression and the desperate violence it could provoke. Adam Jones may have been silenced, but the echo of his defiance lived on, haunting Mississippi, haunting slavery, haunting America itself. His act cannot be smoothed into a lesson of redemption or forgiveness. It was born from chains, from humiliation, from the crushing certainty that life would never be his own. When a system builds its foundation on cruelty, the eruption of violence is not an accident. It is the offspring of oppression itself. Slavery in America was not only fields and whips. It was law and order, twisted against humanity. It was the theft of childhoods, the breaking of families, the silencing of voices, until only anger remained. Adam's story forces us to see this truth without flinching. His violence did not emerge from the shadows of a single boy's heart. It emerged from the shadows of an entire society that normalized domination, control, and brutality. For the masters, his act was a terror that shook their sleep. For the enslaved, it was a flicker of vengeance, proof that the system could bleed. Both reactions reveal the same core. Slavery was never stable. It lived in constant fear of the very people it sought to crush. Every plantation, no matter how tightly run, carried within it the possibility of rebellion. Reflection does not excuse. It does not glorify. It remembers. Adam Jones reminds us that resistance is written in history, not only through speeches and documents, but through moments of blood and fire. His story does not offer peace. It leaves behind a mirror, showing what happens when a people are denied humanity, when chains become the only language of control. Was he a monster or a butcher? Drop one sentence below, monster or martyr, and subscribe for the next untold story we'll unearth together. The memory of Adam Jones is not comfortable. It is not meant to be. It unsettles because it reveals the cost of bondage and the extremes to which desperation can drive the human spirit. He was a child forced into labor, stripped of freedom, pressed into silence, until silence shattered. As this story closes, one truth remains. History remembers not only the chains that bound millions, but also the blood spilled in the breaking of them. Adam Jones stands as both victim and avenger, a reminder that beneath the weight of slavery, rebellion always waited. His name is carved into America's past, and his act forces us to confront the brutal reality of what slavery truly created.